Here is a simple approach to building a nice looking mantle. This mantle is going to be mounted to a rock wall over a fireplace, which makes things a little more complex, but we'll get to that later. This wood we are using for the project is called alder, which is an interesting hardwood that I've come to really enjoy working with. It's pretty lightweight and not extremely hard, so it's easy to mill and sand. I'm making the mantle shelf out of a thicker slab of wood, which is about 1.5 inches thick. It's called 6/4 because its dimensional thickness is 6/4 of an inch. The 6/4 pieces I bought did not come with one of the edges straight lined. What I mean by straight line is that the material needs to have a straight edge on one of its sides to be able to run against the fence on the table saw to get uniform cuts. To straight line the wood, I have this contraption which starts with a piece of oak that is very straight. In fact, I've had this piece of oak probably 25 years, and it's about as straight as it ever was. I attach these brackets to the piece of oak, which is going to allow me to clamp down on my thick piece of alder that I'm needing to cut a straight edge on. After making a few adjustments and tightening the clamp screws down, I can run my thick piece through the table saw. This gives me the straight edge I need to now make further cuts in the material to begin working with. After having cut my 6/4 alder into strips, I'm going to glue them together to give me a width of about 8 inches for the shelf. You may wonder why I'm laminating these pieces together rather than using a solid piece for the shelf. It's primarily because these materials have a slight twist to them, so a good way to address that issue is to cut it up into strips and then use dowels or biscuits, or in my case dominoes, to help align the pieces and make them straight. The main advantage of this domino cutter is that it is so fast compared to any other method, so for any kind of production-oriented projects where speed is helpful, this cutter and the dominoes are hard to beat. After a test fit, I'm ready to glue the pieces together. The main consideration here is to get a thin layer of glue on all the faces that are going to be glued together, as well as the dominoes themselves and in their slots. I want to get a little bit of glue squeezed out in the joints after I've clamped them together. If you have some glue that is squeezed out of the joints, if you sand that material down relatively soon after it's been glued up, sawdust from the sanding process will mix with the glue and help hide imperfections that may have come about when you were making your cuts. One other thing to keep in mind when gluing strips together like this is to alternate the direction of the wood grain on your ends. This will help reduce the tendency of the pieces to bend or warp over time by aligning the pieces in this way. It is also a good idea to check the alignment of the pieces as you are clamping materials together to dry. Using clamps like this helps to align the entire surface and make it as flat as possible. This comes in very handy when you start sanding, as edges that are sticking up just a bit have to be sanded down. Now for the box below, I kind of like this look to make the mantle appear a little more substantial. Plus, it's an easy approach to build as well as install. I'm still using hardwood for this because over the years I've gravitated towards using more and more hardwood on projects rather than plywoods. I used to think it was the real expert carpenters who knew how to work with hardwoods, and plywoods were easier for less experienced woodworkers. Now I don't really think it matters either way, but I enjoy working with hardwood most of the time now. I'm using a method I might use to build a drawer for the box, but in this case I'm going to miter the corners of my sides of my box to give it the look of a solid chunk of wood. I'm cutting a dado in the side pieces of my box to hold the bottom of the box in place. I could pull the blade on the table saw and use the dado stack to cut the full 3/4 inch needed in one pass, but that seems like a lot of effort to go to when I can make about 8 or 9 passes of the material over my 1/8 inch table saw blade to accomplish the same thing and not change any blades out at all. For some reason that seems like I'm saving time, but in reality I'm probably not. Cutting the slot allows the box to inset into the structure, so it's the best approach to ending up with a really clean and precise appearance. After a quick test fit of everything, I'm ready to assemble the pieces, which I begin by gluing the miters together and using masking tape to initially hold the two pieces together. I tack things together with a small pin nailer to assure the miters stay in place while the glue dries. The bottom then simply insets into the dado slots, and again I use the pin nailer to attach the end pieces of the box to the bottom. The one other step I need to take is to add one more structural piece to the box. This piece will never be seen because it will be covered by the mantle shelf, but it's an important part that allows everything to be tied together. This is a scrap piece of poplar that I cut to size and attach with a finish nail gun in place at the top of the box. I will screw through the top of this piece into a 2x4 that will be mounted to our rock fireplace. The box simply slips over the 2x4, and then I run screws through this piece to hold the box in place. Then our mantle shelf rests on top of the box, and I run several screws through the mantle shelf into this poplar piece. So while it's not seen, it is the most important structural part of the mantle. I prepped the box for staining by filling any holes I made with the nail guns with a natural color wood filler that will accept stain. I had one nail head that didn't quite set deep enough, so I tapped it just a little deeper with a nail set so that the wood filler will cover it, and then after some light sanding it is ready for stain. I'd love to tell you that I had a good reason for using a 1-inch foam brush to stain the mantle. The simplest explanation is that it was handy. I had just stained some things with it earlier, so it was within reach. If I'd wanted to walk about 30 feet to the other end of the shop, I have a drawer full of 2-inch foam brushes, which would have been about perfect for this. But I didn't want to do that. In the bigger picture, a larger brush would have saved me some time, but when you've been doing this type of work for as long as I have, sometimes you just want to get it done with whatever is handy. And so, there you go. My video captures me in that frame of mind of just wanting to get this thing done. In the end, it looks great either way. By the way, this stain is called English chestnut. When you are spraying finishes on projects like this, there are just a few things to keep in mind. When spraying up and down faces like on the box here, you want to build the finish with multiple light coats. You don't want to spray a heavy coat that may start to run before the finish has a chance to begin setting up. So a lighter coat on those vertical faces is the best approach. On flat surfaces, I can spray heavier because gravity isn't going to affect that surface. I don't want you to get the idea either that I'm spraying with a fancy high-priced spray rig. This spray gun is about $25 and uses an air compressor to spray. I have just learned to use it and know its capabilities. So as long as I keep it clean and get the thickness of my material that I'm spraying right, I get wonderful finishes with it. The product I'm spraying is called polyacrylic, and over the last 5 years or so it's become my go-to finish. If it looks like I'm having a good time and lots of conversations with people while I'm working, that would be true. These customers have a wonderful family that I've gotten to know. In fact, the upper shelf units on each side of the fireplace I built about a year ago and have a video link in the corner of that project. The only trick to installing the mantle is to get the 2x4 mounted securely and even against the rock face. As I attach the 2x4, I place shims as needed to tighten my bolts against to make sure the 2x4 is very solid. I was able to locate 3 studs through the rock to tap into with my bolts. I was also prepared to use toggle bolts if necessary, which would have worked fine as well, but I was happy to locate the studs as my first choice. Honestly, the biggest challenge I had in this installation was drilling through the rock with some worn-out old masonry bits, but ultimately they got the job done. Once the 2x4 was in place, I checked it again for level, then slipped the box over it, pushed it up against the face before running 3 screws equally spaced across into the 2x4. The last thing was to put the mantle shelf on top and repeat the process again with 3 screws evenly spaced across the length of the mantle. One final check with the level. I'm not quite sure why I'm doing that because it's too late to do anything about it now, but fortunately everything looks good, so I'm ready to do some final cleanup and turn the project over to the owners.